We've mentioned sort of the Gotham departures on this show multiple times, and I keep saying the big picture stuff about people want playing time, people need money. I just also wonder if there isn't a sense here that the roster stacking for Gotham is purely just not sustainable. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. It is Thursday, December 19th. We've got some actually big soccer stories to talk about. We got one major retirement, we got one major NWSL trade, and then we got a little bit of a viewing guide for this weekend because we've got some really nice women's sports stories going on. We've got some nice on-court, off-court battles to talk about as we wrap up the sports calendar year for 2024. So let's just go ahead and dig in. So there were actually a couple pretty big breaking soccer news stories in the latter half of this week. We're going to dig into some of the large ones, the ins, the outs. We've got some off the field business that's been attending to in the NWSL, but I think we have to start with kind of this big monumental piece of news and something that maybe feels very right in the moment, but also kind of sad because you see a player walking away from the game, and the fact that it is the end of the year, we're all feeling reflective, we're all thinking about the bigger picture. Becky Sauerbrunn, two-time World Cup champion, Olympic gold medalist, three-time NWSL champion, is walking away from the game. U.S. Women's National Team defender, NWSL defending legend, multiple NWSL Defender of the Year award winner, excellence on and off the field individually and for the team. She's 39 years old. She has played her last season in Portland. She wrote a really lovely statement on social media about it. I think if you are listening to this show, you probably saw it. She had a really nice metaphor kind of about that the dream life that she was living as a soccer player and all of the little things that she loved and the teammates that she loved playing with and the fans and the environment and how she's excited to kind of close her eyes again and rest. We're going to we'll talk a little bit about Sauerbrunn's career. We'll talk about what I remember. She is one of these players, this wave of players, many of whom retired this year, that for what I can recall has always been there as in terms of even, her leadership off of the field, how excellent she has been on the field, the way she has stewarded certain things that we now take for granted in the sport in the right direction. She was a Titan on and off the field for 16 years. She was one of the major factors in the U.S. Women's National Team negotiating equal pay. She was a big part of the founding of the NWSL. People might know Becky's story kind of from the beginning, sort of hit the light notes. She was a college soccer standout at Virginia, WPS standout in the younger years of her career. She was one of the first players that people always referred to as someone as her league play got her on the radar of the U.S. Women's National Team. She came up in that era where maybe you were a mainstay on the youth national teams or maybe you were a player that they had always had their eye on. But she was a player who, just through continued excellence in the way that she was able to play in college and in these different domestic leagues that all struggled to kind of get off the ground, that was how she got her first major minutes. She gets her first major tournament minutes with the U.S. Women's National Team in 2011. She becomes kind of a known staple of the team in 2012 when they win that Olympic gold. That's sort of truly the beginning of the Becky Sauerbrunn era of the U.S. Women's National Team. 2015, she wins back-to-back NWSL championships. I would say personally, the first NWSL game that I ever saw was in fall of 2015, which is crazy to believe that now that's almost 10 years ago. I did see that fateful game where FCKC ripped Chicago apart in the 2015 NWSL semifinal, and I was there with a couple of friends who didn't watch soccer at all, and we all walked away from that game and they were like, man, that number 4 in the back for Kansas City, it was that Chicago could not do a single thing to get past that player, even though she wasn't the one scoring the goals. You could just see watching her in person was always such a privilege because you felt like you were understanding the way that soccer works in real time. She moves around a bit. FCKC becomes Utah, and then from Utah, she goes on to Portland. Later in her career, she anchors the 2019 World Cup winners, the U.S. Women's National Team. She wins another NWSL championship with Portland in 2022. And the way that Becky Sauerbrunn played soccer, it's kind of like the game is a math problem that only she knew how to solve, I think is the only way to put it. You talk about these players where when they go and play these games, they're kind of going into the matrix. They've unlocked the matrix and everything else is moving slowly around them while they are moving at full speed. She even references this in her statement when stepping away from the game, where she says, one of the great pleasures that she took as a soccer player was that knowledge of saying, if I step here, then they'll go there, and now I can win it. Now I can win the ball. She played angles. She never lost composure. She was sneaky good with her head on set pieces. If you go and look at her NWSL goal compilations, they weren't many, but every single one of them were like bangers. She was really good at the arcing header from maybe the top of the box. It's really remarkable at this point that she never got one for the U.S. She now holds that wonderful record of the most caps without a goal for the U.S. women's national team. And yeah, to see her live was to truly understand the sport as it's supposed to be played. And I hope that as many people were able to see that, if not for the U.S. women's national team, but for the various NWSL teams that she played for the last 11, 12 years of NWSL play. And I think that maybe that's also what I'll remember for Becky Sauerbrunn, is as a player who built her international career on maybe not NWSL play, but on WS play, on league play. She was always a really interesting advocate for players that came after her through that same system. I couldn't find it. I was looking for it this morning. There was a letter that Becky Sauerbrunn wrote. I believe it became public due to some of the lawsuit discovery in the equal pay fight with US Soccer. There was a letter or an email that Becky Sauerbrunn sent to her US Women's National Team teammates at the time, maybe 2012, 2013. And it was just a really nice, very simple pitch to them for the NWSL as a concept. Because you have to think about, during that time, the U.S. Women's National Team players had been burnt by these domestic leagues over and over again. These leagues couldn't get off the ground. They were trying to play in Europe. When WPS folded, they were scrambling. Some of them had to go down and play in the W League. Some of them had to go to Europe. Some of them, they didn't trust necessarily that the domestic league was even going to happen and even going to have sustained success. I mean, I remember that in the beginning of this league, there was this feeling of, okay, when you get to year 3, year 4, year 5, is it viable? Is it going to stick around? And Becky Sauerbrunn basically just laid it out to her teammates of, this feels financially soluble. I think getting a league going is valuable. And I just remember it was very simple. She was just like, just give it a shot. Just please give it a shot. And so when you look at the NWSL and where it's at now, that doesn't happen without Becky Sauerbrunn, because without the U.S. Women's National Team players' support, the NWSL does not become what it is. When I think of that 4 stars only protest during the equal pay fight, I think of Becky Sauerbrunn. I think of the way that she led the charge as a player in Portland in 2021 and 2022, speaking truth to power when there were people at the top of her organization that maybe needed to leave the sport because of misconduct and because of neglect, right? I think about how she never took a pity PK for the U.S. or how close we saw her get in St. Louis in 2023 in her hometown. I think about her, the head wrap in the 2019 World Cup final, not phased one bit, just wanting to get back into the game because they don't think they had like any subs left. So she's like, she's got to get back into the game. And just a real history of social advocacy that always felt, again, like the way she approached things off the field was very much how she approached it on the field, which is just that these are all solvable problems if you just slow down a little bit, simplify issues. And I just feel like her social advocacy was always very much led by empathy, which is something that was so important when you did have the U.S. needing to stand up for certain things. The fact that she was always leading with empathy, she was always saying the truth and telling the truth, but making sure that she said it in a way that made sense to people. And I guess that part's not going anywhere, right? I don't think Becky Sauerbrunn is fully walking away from the sport. She, we've seen her do some media stuff. I think that she's going to be around, but they're going to miss that. And I think there's been this adage with some of these major retirements for the U.S. Women's National Team and sort of what they accomplished off the field as much as what they accomplished on the field, which is that her leadership will be missed. I mean, I think her leadership, she got hurt last year. I think her leadership was missed at the World Cup in 2023. Tried to make a go of it back into the U.S. fold in 2024. And sometimes your body just kind of tells you no, and you saw that. And I'm so glad that she came back for one more year to get sort of that complete picture before stepping away, because I do think if her career had ended in 2023, it would have definitely felt like a bit of unfinished business. I think she could be very happy with how she wrapped things up walking away this year. And there is, again, this chapter of the U.S. Women's National Team. We might talk about this a little bit more next week as we talk big picture stuff for 2024, but there is a chapter closing for the U.S., as it both must and is. You can't stop the clock from ticking. You can't stop these eras from changing, but you can acknowledge them when they do. And I think what I will always remember about Becky Sauerbrunn in all of these different moments, and like I said, for 16-year career, and I talk about these different touch points of just her steady leadership. She got it right way, way, way more than she got it wrong. She was brave about what she was talking about because she knew that she had confidence in the way that she felt about things. She was very well studied. And so just, it's incredible to have a player that has that composure on the pitch and off, and just is that same player no matter what. And I just feel very lucky to have gotten to cover her, because she was serious when she needed to be, had fun when she needed to be, and I can't wait to see what she does next. But yeah, we'll talk a bigger picture, kind of what 2024. It was a year of transformation for the U.S. Women's National Team this year, and we'll talk about that a little bit more next week. But for now, just a salute to Becky Sauerbrunn. Maybe not the most surprising retirement announcement in the context of where she's at with her career, but perhaps the player that, despite a year of many retirements, many people will miss the most. But we can take solace in the fact that she has written her name into pretty much every important thing that has happened in domestic and international women's soccer in the last 16 years. And I think that's all you can hope for. So now we move on to the future. Now, I kind of wax poetic about the ending of something, but man, 2025 is coming up, and the NWSL does not slow down. There's very good reporting this week. Shout out to the news breakers. It's not an easy job. I saw Dan Noletta break some news, Jenna Tonelli break some news, Theo Lloyd-Hughes break some news of a big trade between Gotham FC and the Seattle Reign. So Lynn Williams, U.S. Women's National Team forward, NWSL championship many times over, is going. This is the most recent report. So I just read this. I think it was Theo Lloyd-Hughes who published this in Sports Illustrated. That forward Lynn Williams and goalkeeper Cassie Miller have been traded from Gotham to the Seattle Reign in exchange for midfielder Jalen Howell and an undisclosed transfer fee. So pieces moving. Lynn Williams is moving back to the West Coast. As people might know, that's where she's from, but this is a big move for her. Cassie Miller is a backup goalkeeper, a very capable backup goalkeeper. She played quite a bit for Chicago in 2021. She's played for Kansas City when she went to Kansas City. She moves to Gotham, plays very capable backup there, and now maybe has a shot to fight for a starting role in Seattle. And then Jalen Howell, if people might forget, you think, wait, Jalen Howell played for the Reign? Yes, briefly. So she was a player in that Bethany Balcer trade somewhat mid-season-ish last year. She moves from Racing Louisville to Seattle. She plays some. Seattle at that point, their season is mostly effectively over. Now Jalen Howell is going to go play midfield for Gotham, which makes sense because Gotham has already had a player like perhaps Delaney Sheehan walk away from their midfield. So a lot of moving pieces. This is a big deal. We've mentioned sort of the Gotham departures on this show multiple times, and I keep saying the big picture stuff about people want playing time, people need money. I just also wonder if there isn't a sense here that the roster stacking for Gotham is purely just not sustainable. Jenna Tonelli, I think it was last night in some of her reporting, she indicated that Williams, it might have been a requested trade out. She's 31 years old, maybe wanting to move closer to home in California, maybe wanting to just be a little bit more settled as she nears the end of her career as well. And it's good for the Reign, who needed to make some pretty drastic moves to get back into a competitive form in some way. They really were not very competitive for most of this year. They decided, I think it was interesting, the Reign decided not to make any major front office changes post-sale of the club. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but also if you're not going to make any front office changes, you have to be pretty ambitious in the offseason, and we're seeing that from them. Lynn Williams is a really good leader. We've seen her leadership only grow. Again, just struck by the way that she played with the U.S. at the end of this year, being that kind of that spark plug for the team against the Netherlands, and just showing a lot of nice veteran leadership. She can play out on the wing and she can play centrally. They need those kind of speedier players. Seattle is a very slow tempo team. I think it's a good move. But again, just sort of the raising. Well, actually, I have two things to say about this. Thing number one is, the 2018 and 2019 North Carolina teams, and I do understand that with every year that passes, that gets further and further away, and so you're going to see more movement as these players age and want different things. But it was pointed out to me yesterday, and I agree with this, that it's weird to see a player like Lynn Williams move so much, right? She was so settled in North Carolina. North Carolina obviously has that entire roster blown up in some pretty, unfortunate circumstances. She goes to Kansas City. She gets hurt. She gets traded from Kansas City to Gotham. She puts together a really nice season for Gotham. They win the NWSL championship. She plays for Gotham in 2024 as well. They they finish in the top 4. They played well. And then she's off to Seattle. And you do kind of see some of these graduates of this dominant North Carolina organization again in 2018, 2019, and they've been moving around a lot. And it's been really fascinating to see these players who are so talented and so winning and have such incredible resumes have a little bit of trouble kind of finding the club home for them after that particular experience. And so I hope that this is it for Williams. I think that she'll be wonderful for the Reign. I think she can be very, very proud of what she pulled off at Gotham, especially as we know that trade was very surprising to her leaving Kansas City. But then also, I think it's just another example of Gotham seeing some major changes. And we know they have a couple of high profile players out of contract. The name that got passed around last night when this news broke was obviously Ms. Purse is in free agency as well. She's a player that they might be hoping to re-sign. Maybe they can't do that and keep Williams. I think there are some of those considerations at play in making those decisions. And especially obviously if you have a player who has requested a trade because of, maybe personal reasons, you can move money around a little bit more and make that happen. But I think at this point, I talked about this last year, talked about this a little bit in the context of this offseason, but I think you can pretty much definitively say that the super team of 2024 for Gotham was not necessarily a great success, right? They don't win anything, no trophies in 2024. And at the end of the season, pretty much immediately, that roster changes significantly. So I'm really curious to see what other teams learn from this, I guess, whether it's not worth it to roster stack, whether it's the way that maybe behind the scenes people figured out like the way that their contracts work, and maybe those contracts weren't working for the players anymore. I am just curious what the takeaways are going to be league-wide, because it was a short experiment, but like I said, it wasn't a particularly successful one when it comes to the results on the pitch. So just really interested to see how this all shakes out. I do think Gotham getting Howell back is good value, very good value. Jalen Howell is a very talented player. She's a player that everyone kind of has always thought could be on the U.S. Women's National Team radar. Again, she came into the team as a younger player coming out of college. She kind of gets stashed away in Louisville for a little bit, maybe plateaus a little bit in her progress. This is an opportunity for a fresh start for her. She's a very kind of wrecking ball style player, reminds people like in her physicality of Julie Ertz a lot. And so I'm hopeful that with as finely tuned as the Gotham midfield can be, that is the kind of environment where Jalen Howell will take some pretty important steps in her progress as well. So we got a lot going on in the NWSL. There's going to be more to come, but as always, I just love the fact that we are still seeing so much player movement. We're seeing these different considerations at play, and we're going to see these teams look different, because that's the best part of the NWSL is things don't stay the same all the time, and good teams don't always stay good, and bad teams don't always stay bad. And so we're just seeing that over and over again. Seattle got better today, and Gotham, I think, got a fair amount of quality back. And I think that all of those things make for an exciting season next year. So just looking ahead a little bit to the weekend, I'm just going to do a little bit of a viewing guide for people who maybe are looking for some women's sports to watch. Tonight, Thursday night, is the NCAA volleyball tournament national semifinals. You'll see Pitt playing Louisville and Nebraska playing Penn State. And then this weekend, there will be the volleyball final. I love watching college volleyball. Like I said, I just hope it's close. No sweeps. Team no sweeps. I think it's possible we'll see number 1 versus number 2 in the final, which would be Pitt versus Nebraska. And that will be a powerhouse game too. There's a lot of good narratives there. A lot of really good narratives there. You got the ACC looking for their first ever national championship. You've got Nebraska, who is kind of, they are perennial winners, but they've always kind of made it to the top of the mountain and then can't get over the top. I just think it's going to be really, really fun. So I highly recommend checking out the NCAA volleyball tournament this weekend because we have to say goodbye to the sport until next year after that. College basketball, the big blockbuster game this weekend is obviously USC at UConn on Saturday night. Juju Watkins versus Paige Beckers. I think I mentioned this earlier this week. You've got this team, 2 teams kind of with freshmen coming in and transfers and figuring out how to play as a team. And UConn has had some really nice results after that loss to Notre Dame. USC has had some really nice results after their loss to Notre Dame. It's just a couple of teams that are like, Notre Dame, don't like them. And then they get to play each other. The other sleeper game, though, that I would recommend if people want to check out sort of a different level, maybe a little bit more in the weeds, is I think Ohio State versus Stanford on Friday is going to be really interesting. Ohio State is still one of the few still undefeated teams in the country, but they haven't had any huge real tests as of yet. I think they have just one ranked win so far, because I think they only have one ranked game so far. They have a couple really exciting players, again, transfers, freshmen, and then they have a true pro prospect in Cody McMahon. Stanford is a team that has played a couple really good teams very close. They were out of the rankings at the beginning of the season. They briefly become ranked, and then they lose too many games to stay ranked. But if anyone watched that overtime game against LSU, they know that Stanford can hang. Still a very, very good team. So that might be one. If you're looking for, you've got the big blockbuster, but if you're looking for something to do on Friday night, check out Ohio State versus Stanford, because I think that game is also going to be very, very good. And then just one final thing I want to tap into here as a closing thought And this is a little bit maybe in the weeds because it's media referencing media, but I do just want to recommend, if anybody hasn't listened to it yet, Trinity Rodman, US Women's National Team star, Washington Spirit star, in my opinion, the breakout star of the US in 2024, went on the very popular Call Her Daddy podcast this week, which that show is a deep dive show. It's a show where when people go on, you get the sense that they have maybe agreed to some things beforehand. There's an openness to it that is agreed upon. There's a comfort level. People are willing to talk about their lives. And Trinity Rodman goes in depth about her relationship with her father in a way that I had not seen her do before. Not that people didn't know about her, some of the details of her relationship with her father, who is Dennis Rodman, the former NBA player, but like things have been written about it and she had spoken about it a little bit, but this is very much in her own words. It felt like it was a platform for her to discuss some of the things that she maybe hasn't felt comfortable discussing in the past. And I really enjoyed it, not only just enjoying Rodman's candor, but I just found it to be a really interesting point in sports/cultural media for a women's soccer player of that stature to go on a show of that popularity and talk about something that in many ways it's a huge sports story, not just a women's sports story. And I enjoyed hearing Rodman in her own words talk about her life in that way. I enjoyed seeing Rodman use media as a tool in that way. I think the relationship between media and some of these players is one that this is something Megan Rapinoe talked about all the time at the end of her career, which is just, yes, the media can be a contentious relationship, but the best thing you can do as a player is understand the tools at your disposal when you do media. And I just thought, again, we talk about sort of this shifting era of the U.S. Women's National Team and some of the endings and some of the beginnings. And it was just really cool to see Rodman kind of step into her truth in that way in a week where we are kind of talking about the changing of the guard. So I just highly recommend that if you want a long form podcast for this week, other than all of ours, obviously. Check out Trinity Rodman on Call Her Daddy. Just an interesting moment in sports media for the NWSL, for the U.S. Women's National Team, and for Rodman herself, who I believe is going to be a superstar for many years to come. So this has been today's edition of The Late Sub. I am your host, Claire Watkins. Shout out to producer extraordinaire Parker Fenton. We've got some wrap-up stuff for you around the holidays, but we are winding down for the year. Hope everyone else is too, getting a little bit of a chance to relax before 2025. But we'll have some stuff to discuss. It was a big year. We're going to do a little bit of looking back, and I hope everyone comes along for the ride for that one too.